You're about to witness something Washington never planned to make public. A sitting Supreme Court justice walks into a federal courtroom uninvited and leaves with his entire career in question. What happened inside those marble walls wasn't law. It was power dressed in a robe, trying to silence one woman who refused to bow. They thought Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett would break when Justice Brett Kavanaugh handed her a 5-year suspension without trial. But what they didn't see coming was the envelope she walked out with. Inside, a $2.7 million secret that would ignite a political earthquake across every courtroom in America. This isn't just a story about corruption. It's about what happens when truth stands its ground, even against the highest bench in the land. If you've ever felt like justice only protects the powerful, this story is going to hit home. So before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Because after this, you won't be able to stay silent. This isn't just another political headline. This is the beginning of a reckoning. It started like most political takedowns do, not with a loud bang, but with a whisper dressed in legal formality. At exactly 6:13 a.m., Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sun hadn't yet cracked the horizon over Washington, D.C., and the street outside her brownstone was still quiet. But the message flashing across her screen wasn't quiet. It was a sledgehammer hidden in bureaucracy. You are hereby summoned to appear before the D.C. Federal Court of Appeals at 9 a.m. No explanation, no advance warning, no legal counsel CC'd. Just 3 hours notice to walk into what smelled less like a hearing and more like a political ambush. Jasmine sat up slowly, not shocked, just steady. She had learned a long time ago that power rarely attacks you with honesty. It uses decorum like camouflage. She dressed in silence, a navy blue blazer over a gray blouse. The same cross-shaped pendant her grandmother had gifted her when she graduated law school hung gently around her neck. She touched it once before stepping outside into the cold. The wind that morning had teeth, sharp enough to bite through even her tailored wool coat. But it wasn't the weather that made her tighten her jaw. It was the gut-deep knowledge that something was off. 3 days earlier, Jasmine had delivered a fiery speech on the Senate Oversight Committee floor. Not naming names, but calling out the federal judiciary for shielding itself from public accountability while the American people paid the price. She hadn't pointed to Kavanaugh, but she didn't have to. Everyone watching knew exactly who she was talking about. That speech, poised, precise, and unflinchingly bold, had gone viral. 12.3 million views in 48 hours, shared by pastors, veterans, civil rights attorneys. Even retirees on Facebook were reposting it, writing captions like, "She says what we all feel." And now she was being summoned, not investigated, not questioned, summoned, like a peasant to a king. The courthouse loomed like a stone fortress. Inside, the air felt colder than outside. Reporters were already filing in. A few staffers from Capitol Hill whispered in corners. Courtroom clerks shuffled papers as if it were any other morning. But it wasn't. Not today. The moment Jasmine stepped into the chamber, cameras clicked like gunfire. Not a word had been spoken, but the energy was electric. Then the doors at the far end creaked open. Justice Brett Kavanaugh entered. Not as a witness, not as an advisor, but as the presiding judicial supervisor. The room froze. No Supreme Court justice had ever sat in this role for a disciplinary hearing involving a sitting member of Congress. It wasn't just irregular, it was unconstitutional. But no one stopped him. Because this wasn't about protocol, it was about power. He walked slowly, deliberately, as if he owned the marble beneath his shoes. He didn't glance at the court officials. He didn't nod at the reporters. His eyes went straight to Jasmine, and locked. She returned the gaze without blinking. It wasn't defiance, it was clarity. This man didn't come to judge, he came to erase. The hearing began without introduction. Jasmine's legal counsel stood to request clarification on the charges. Abuse of influence in matters involving the federal judiciary, the clerk read. Before her attorney could open his folder, Kavanaugh raised a hand. "We don't need rehearsed defenses today," he said. That was it. No motion, no objection, no procedural grounding. Just a command. from a robe that had decided its verdict before sunrise. Jasmine's lawyer looked stunned. He opened his mouth again, but Kavanaugh cut him off with a single glare. Then the justice leaned forward. His voice lowered, not legally sharp, but personally venomous. "You," he said slowly, "are a dangerous cocktail. Ambition, low ethics, and confidence you've done nothing to earn." The words weren't courtroom language. They were an attack, a slap dressed in formality. The gallery inhaled audibly, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat still, back straight, her fingers gently gripping the edge of the table. Kavanaugh leaned back, satisfied with the blow. But Jasmine had seen men like him before, not in robes, in uniform, in hallways, in campaign meetings, men who thought authority gave them permission to condescend. She didn't respond. She let the silence hang in the air like a witness. Kavanaugh wasn't done. "This chamber must act to protect the credibility of the judiciary," he declared. Then he reached for a single piece of paper, signed it, and read aloud. "This court hereby suspends Representative Jasmine Crockett from all governmental duties for a period of 5 years, effective immediately. She is further prohibited from seeking public office during this time." No deliberation, no vote, no legal precedent cited. Just a Supreme Court justice flexing muscle that wasn't his to use. And he did it with the tone of a man who believed no one could stop him. When the gavel dropped, the room stayed silent. But it wasn't shock. It was something deeper. The sound of a democratic system being warped in real time. Jasmine remained seated, jaw tight, eyes forward. The cameras caught it all. Some reporters rushed to file stories. Kavanaugh silences Crockett. Others hesitated because they saw it too. This wasn't a hearing. It was a warning. To every truth-teller who dared speak without permission. To every woman who challenged the Boys' Club of American Power. To every citizen who forgot their place. But Jasmine hadn't forgotten anything. She remembered. 17 years old, Houston. A cold night, a streetlight, a white police officer with a hand on his holster. "Don't look at me like you got rights," he growled. She'd been walking home from a school debate, still had the note cards in her coat pocket when he slammed her onto the sidewalk. She'd watched the blood drip from her cheek onto the concrete and counted the cracks. That was the night she stopped believing justice came in uniforms or titles and started believing it had to be earned. As Jasmine left the courtroom, escorted like a criminal, the noise outside was deafening. Cameras, commentators, political operatives. Some shouted questions. Others whispered predictions of her career's end. She didn't speak until a man stepped out of the shadows. Senator Allen Rivers, retired, a ghost from old battles. He didn't smile, didn't explain, just slipped a brown leather envelope into her hand. "You didn't lose," he said quietly. "You just got upgraded to witness." And with that, he disappeared. Jasmine climbed into her black car, closed the door, and opened the envelope. Inside, receipts, memos, signed wire transfers. One number at the top, 2.7 million, and a name attached, Brett M. Kavanaugh. Jasmine stared at the contents like they were radioactive. Not because they were unexpected, but because they confirmed everything she already felt in her gut. Every page whispered a truth she'd long suspected, but never had the evidence to prove. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't procedural aggression. This was premeditated corruption wrapped in judicial silk. The first page bore the Justice Department's letterhead, top right corner stamped "Confidential." But it wasn't the seal that made Jasmine's stomach clench. It was the line beneath it. Internal Review, Judicial Ethics Inquiry, Justice B.M. Kavanaugh. Her eyes scanned line by line, hands steady, heart racing, private charter flights, luxury accommodations paid for by unnamed advocacy networks, weekend retreats at Colorado hunting lodges, donations routed through shell corporations, each one noted, each one itemized, each one signed off by internal staff, but buried. This wasn't a file someone misplaced. This was a cover-up someone had carefully designed. Then came the transfer record, $2.7 million. Dated September 2016, routed through a Delaware-based nonprofit. Destination, a law firm specializing in confidential settlements. The memo line, Special Circumstance Resolution. There it was, not a rumor, not a right-wing whisper or a partisan talking point. A paper trail, a sealed settlement. She turned the page, a redacted name, a confirmed allegation, a line at the bottom. Witness testimony deemed credible by in-house ethics counsel. But the file never made it to his confirmation hearing. The room Jasmine sat in wasn't spinning. It was hardening, like steel being forged in real time. She read on, emails, names, dates, lobbyist dinners, a photo of a handwritten thank you note. Brett, appreciate the discretion. We're good on Colorado. MC, Martin Chase, CEO of Agronova Industries. The very company that had recently had its federal case dismissed without comment by the Supreme Court. She leaned back, closed her eyes, let the silence speak. Then she whispered, "They didn't bring me to a hearing. They brought me to a stage." Her aide, Naomi, knocked softly on the door. "Ma'am." Jasmine didn't look up. "Bring the legal team and get me the ethics counsel from last year, the one who resigned." "Are we going to press?" Jasmine finally met her gaze. "No, we're going to court." Naomi paused. "Again?" Jasmine nodded. "But this time, we're not defending. We're unveiling." The next 24 hours blurred, not in confusion, but in precision. Jasmine and her team didn't scramble. They assembled timeline charts, whistleblower reports, financial digests, digital backups. At 3:42 a.m., a secure call from Senator Rivers. His voice was tired but clear. "You'll have exactly 5 minutes. After that, the feed will cut unless the public interest locks it in." Jasmine replied, 5 minutes is enough to light a fire." He didn't argue. He just said, "Bring a match." 9 a.m., sharp. The courtroom was packed again, but this time it buzzed differently, not like a funeral, like a fuse had been lit beneath the marble. Kavanaugh sat perched, cold, collected, but twitchy. The fingers on his right hand drummed against the bench. He looked down only once, toward Jasmine. This time, she wasn't a question. She was an answer. The clerk called order. The gavel tapped. Jasmine's lawyer requested one motion. "Final statement for the record." Kavanaugh rolled his eyes. "Make it quick." The live feed hit 3.4 million viewers in real time. Jasmine stood, not as a defendant, but as a documentarian of rot. She opened the leather folder, pulled the first page, held it high. "The following is a Department of Justice internal memo," she said, "concerning undeclared financial favors received by Justice Brett Kavanaugh." She didn't yell. She didn't dramatize. She read each line, each number, each transaction. She read as if each syllable was a shovel, exposing what had been buried. And then came the wire transfer. $2.7 million. Her voice didn't waver. She spoke it like gospel. The DOJ found these funds were directed toward the settlement of a sexual misconduct allegation during the justice's nomination year. The victim's name is redacted. The testimony was deemed credible. The documentation was sealed. The file was scrubbed from public vetting. The courtroom sat frozen. Even the stenographer had stopped typing. Jasmine continued. Attached are photographic records placing Justice Kavanaugh at a Colorado resort in the company of lobbyists representing Agronova Industries, 2 weeks before the Supreme Court declined to hear a class action suit against that very company. She paused. Let it settle. Kavanaugh's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Jasmine didn't need permission. She kept going. Multiple ethical violations, multiple financial cover-ups, patterned behavior. And tonight, the American people will see this live. The live stream counter, 4.9 million. Then came the video, security footage, time-stamped, Kavanaugh, a table, 3 men in branded fleece jackets, a bottle of scotch. On the wall behind them, a private hunting lodge logo. Jasmine ended with one question. Tell me, Your Honor, do you believe taking gifts, vacations, and hush money is more ethical than speaking into a microphone? The room imploded in silence. The silence that followed Jasmine's final question wasn't ordinary. It was the kind of silence that only happens when the world realizes it's not watching a courtroom. It's witnessing a reckoning. Justice Kavanaugh didn't speak, couldn't speak, not because he lacked authority, but because authority had just been stripped bare. The courtroom sat suspended, time frozen in shame and shock. Clerks gripped their pens like lifelines. Reporters stopped typing mid-sentence. Even the security guards glanced at one another as if asking silently, "What now?" The live stream ticked over 6.1 million viewers. Somewhere in homes across America, elderly veterans leaned forward in their recliners. Retired teachers clutched their coffee cups. Widows of civil rights lawyers blinked at the television, murmuring, "My God, she did it." Jasmine wasn't smiling. She wasn't victorious. She was unmoved, because this was never about revenge. It was about exposure. A soft rustle broke the quiet. From the rear bench, a Department of Justice official, gray suit, red file tucked under one arm, stood. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't make a statement. He simply walked out. That movement alone said more than any gavel, because when the DOJ walks out mid-hearing, the house of cards doesn't just shake. It begins to fall. Kavanaugh glanced toward the exit. He blinked. For the first time, he looked small. And then it happened. A clerk stepped forward, hands shaking. She approached the bench with a single sheet of paper and whispered into the mic, "Emergency statement from the Office of Judicial Oversight." Kavanaugh didn't reach for it. He just stared at it, as if it might burn him. Another clerk took it, read it aloud. Effective immediately, Justice Brett Kavanaugh's role in all pending judicial supervision is suspended pending federal ethics investigation. Gasps, audible, sharp. Jasmine didn't blink. She simply stepped back from the podium, folded the leather folder shut, and turned. The gavel didn't fall, because it no longer mattered. Outside, the media was already erupting. Chiron scrolled across screens. Kavanaugh suspended. Crockett shocks nation with documented evidence. Live ethics. Bombshell explodes Supreme Court. But inside, the shift was quieter, more profound. Kavanaugh sat frozen, fingers limp against the desk. The same hand that had dismissed Jasmine's lawyer with a wave now rested motionless. The same mouth that once called her a dangerous cocktail had nothing left to say. Because Jasmine's silence was louder, and the country was listening. Then came the reversal. Another court official, this time from the Appeals Review Board, entered with a statement. The 5-year suspension previously imposed upon Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is hereby nullified and vacated, retroactive to issuance. This action is found to be in violation of constitutional process and ethical standards. Another pause. Then, the court recognizes and apologizes for the irregular handling of the prior sanction. It was as close to a public admission of guilt as any judicial body had ever made. No one cheered, but you could feel the breath release across the room. A shared exhale. Justice didn't shout. It simply stood its ground. Jasmine stepped forward one last time. From her folder, she pulled 3 pages, held them up. "These," she said quietly, "are proposals for reform." The first, establishment of an independent judicial ethics commission. No gasps, just pencil scribbling. The second, quarterly public disclosure of all financial gifts, sponsored trips, and political donations linked to sitting judges. A reporter whispered, "She's building a system, not just taking one down." Shh. The third, federal protection for all whistleblowers in judicial branches, including clerks, staffers, and contractors. Another pause. And then Jasmine said, "Because what I revealed today wasn't bravery, it was proof, and no one should need proof to be protected from power." The chamber remained still, not in fear, not in deference, but in respect. A kind of reverent hush that said, "We just saw something we'll tell our children about." And in that moment, a new precedent was born. Not from a bench, not from a robe, but from the unwavering voice of a woman who chose not to break, even when the system tried to bend her. And that, more than any ruling, was justice. What happened next wasn't broadcast on TV, but it traveled faster than any headline. The clerk's whispered apology echoed in halls where apologies had never dared enter. For decades, power had wrapped itself in procedures. But now the procedures had crumbled under the weight of daylight. Outside the courthouse, reporters sprinted to mobile stations, trying to capture what the nation had just witnessed. A silent takedown, not with protests, but with proof. But inside, Jasmine stood calm, the folder pressed to her chest like a soldier returning from battle with the flag intact. She didn't gloat. She didn't speak again. She simply turned and walked out. Each step carried the weight of generations who'd waited for justice to stop being an idea and finally become a reaction. Capitol Hill didn't know what hit it. Within 12 hours, 31 congressional offices had requested digital copies of Jasmine's proposed reforms. By sunset, her office received confirmation. Both the Oversight and Judiciary Committees were calling emergency sessions. Not weeks from now, tomorrow, emails flooded in. Not from constituents, from other lawmakers, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all asking the same question: how do we get behind this? That night, Jasmine sat in her office alone. Not in darkness, but in a soft, golden light that fell across her desk from the lamp her father had once gifted her when she passed the bar. She scrolled through messages, one from a retired federal judge in Illinois. "I never thought I'd see the day someone spoke the truth like that and lived to reform it." I'd view one from a teenage girl in Alabama. "My mom says you did what Rosa Parks did, but with papers instead of a bus seat." And another, from a whistleblower in the Southern District: "If you pass the third reform, I will testify." Jasmine didn't cry. She simply whispered, "Thank you," and pressed her fingers against the cross at her collarbone. The next day, she re-entered the Capitol. No cameras, no press, no entourage, just a leather folder, 3 pages, and a memory. She passed the bronze plaque outside the Judiciary Committee room. It read, "Let justice be done though the heavens fall." She paused, whispered, "Let's make sure it's justice, not just reputation." The hearing began not with grand speeches, but with silence, because everyone in the room had seen the clip, everyone had heard the evidence, and everyone had read the public response. Jasmine stood. "My name is Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. I was suspended without process. I was judged without evidence, and I stood before power with nothing but documents and the belief that truth doesn't need permission." She laid down the proposals. "This is not vengeance. It's a framework." Gasps? None. Notes? All around. Even the most senior senators were scribbling furiously. She continued, "We are asking for 3 things, 3 tools to keep the most powerful branch in check: an independent judicial ethics commission with no political appointments, mandatory quarterly disclosure of all gifts and trips valued over $1,000, whistleblower protections for court staff, interns, and clerks without exception, no more hiding behind prestige, no more power without receipts." She paused. A young senator from Nebraska cleared his throat. "Congresswoman, do you really think this will pass?" Jasmine looked at him, calm. "Did anyone think I'd make it out of that courtroom?" He smiled, nodded. The vote to advance the bill to markup passed 14-1. In the gallery, an intern wept. Not loudly, but enough to remind the room this wasn't just legislation. It was liberation. That night, the House lit up. Not in color, not in spectacle, but in emails, from constituents, from pastors, from veterans' homes and barbershops and quilting circles, all saying the same thing. "We saw her stand, now we stand with her." CNN called it the Crockett correction. Fox News, even while critical, ran a special report titled, "Can Reform Save the Court?" Columbia Law School released a statement. Her argument is being taught in Ethics 101 starting next semester. And somewhere in South Texas, a high school teacher printed out her quote, "Proof shouldn't be required to protect people from power," and taped it above the blackboard. Back in her office, Jasmine didn't watch the coverage. She didn't read the analysis. She opened a letter. It was from a young clerk, anonymous, typed. "I almost resigned last year after seeing what they buried. I kept asking myself if telling the truth would be worth losing everything. Then I watched you, and I knew. Yes, it is." Jasmine folded the paper, placed it beside the others, and then she whispered, "We've only just begun." It didn't happen overnight. It didn't flash across the screen with confetti or breaking news banners. It happened in the quiet. In the spaces where democracy breathes, classrooms, town halls, church basements, kitchen tables where people whisper politics like prayer. But the movement was real. The Judicial Ethics and Accountability Act of 2025 cleared the House with 289 votes, 94 of them Republican. It moved through the Senate Judiciary Committee with 0 abstentions. And on the day of the floor vote, Jasmine Crockett didn't make a speech. She simply stood beside the clerk as the votes were counted, one by one. Each "I" echoing like a drop in still water. When the final tally was announced, the chamber stood, even her critics, even those who had once called her dangerous. Because what Jasmine had done wasn't partisan. It was proof that principle could still survive politics. Outside, the rotunda filled with applause, not choreographed, not ceremonial, earned. She left the building without fanfare, back through the side entrance. Down the same hallway where, months earlier, she'd whispered, "Let's make it justice, not just reputation." Now, it was both. At a press conference that evening, a journalist asked her, "What's next for Congresswoman Crockett?" She smiled. "Legislation is ink. Justice is culture. Now we work on the second part." Then she walked off the podium. The ripple traveled. Law schools adopted her reforms as case studies. Judicial interns began receiving protections. 3 whistleblower claims were filed the week after the law passed. Not retaliation, revelation. And for the first time in decades, the public trust index in the judicial branch rose, not by much, but it rose, because someone had shown them what it looked like to confront power and not blink. A year later, Columbia Law School unveiled a new hall, the Crockett Center for Judicial Integrity. On the far wall, engraved in bronze, "Truth doesn't need permission." Repeat. Jasmine Crockett, Congressional Hearing Transcript 2025. Students stopped to touch it on their way to class. One left a note below. "Because of you, I didn't stay silent." In her hometown in South Dallas, the high school where she was once suspended for disrupting a lesson held its first civic engagement fair. The auditorium was packed. No fancy lighting, no formal announcement, just folding chairs and the unmistakable sense that something had come full circle. Jasmine entered quietly, waved at her old debate teacher, and sat in the back, until a student, no older than 16, in a hoodie and jeans, stood at the mic. "Congresswoman Crockett?" he asked. She stood. "Were you scared when you read those documents out loud?" Jasmine nodded slowly. "Yes, of course." Another pause. "Then why did you do it?" She walked to the front, didn't take the podium, just spoke. "Because if I didn't, how many more would be forced to keep their mouths shut to protect the powerful?" Silence, then applause, the kind that lingers, the kind that becomes memory. Back in D.C., a marble plaque was installed near the federal courthouse, not to celebrate a trial, but to memorialize a turning point. It reads, "Here, truth stood its ground." Tourists take photos with it, but veterans pause longer, teachers linger, and every now and then, someone leaves flowers. Not because anyone died, but because something was reborn. Jasmine never took a victory lap. She declined a book deal, turned down a streaming docuseries. She didn't need a spotlight because she had something better, a legacy that whispered, "Courage is a habit, and truth is a decision." And America listened.